Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 177. The Kennedy Murrays. Part 4. The mystery of the Scottish heritage of the Kennedy Murrays, and more details on Kennedy Murray Sr.'s children.
My interest in the Kennedy Murray family history really began with a search for the family's ancestry. And this soon involved what turned out to be the mystery of how the Murrays were really hidden McGregors. We told about having found out that Kennedy Murray had been baptised in Dundonald, Scotland in August 1771, with a note on his baptism record that he had been begotten in antenuptial fornication to his parents John Murray and Elizabeth Calder, within the household and the Orkins Castle of the Dowager Countess of Eglinton, perhaps the most well-known or celebrated women in 18th century Scotland, Lady Susanna. I told there of how Lady Susanna Eglinton, née Kennedy, who was daughter of the clan chief of the Kennedys, Sir Archibald Kennedy, the first Baronet of Culdson, and her role in assisting a Kennedy cousin, Elizabeth, and also John Murray to resolve a situation as best they could. That is that John had got Elizabeth pregnant, and so therefore they had a wedding where it was known she was pregnant at the wedding, which was a little bit of a sin in 18th century Scotland. This is the background of why I am very, very confident that Kennedy Murray, the name, was made in honour of that Kennedy connection, as well as the assistance by Lady Susanna in helping to organise a marriage in a related parish, and a Kirk session that had to be held about this matter. In the local session, that went off very well, and John and Elizabeth were soon accepted back into the fold with no problems. I also mentioned earlier that my research had also been able to reasonably confirm that an Alex Murray, who had turned up with a solicitor and money in June 1786 to the Glasgow toll booth, and he did so to pay an expensive bail and to assist a young Kennedy with a petition of banishment, turned out to be, from my research, I was able to identify exactly who it was. And when I did this, I was sure I had found a family tree of Ayrshire Murrays going back to around 1650, with both forward and backward lines of this. And that line included especially a line back to a David Murray at the end of the 17th century, who had two sons, John and Alexander, and they had named their own eldest sons John and Alexander, which was a bit of a variation of the traditional Scottish naming, but not completely unusual. So the Alex was in the other line of the family to John, and Kennedy's father John was in a separate but closely related line. Now, when I made that connection, I was really confident that the family tree that I'd sort of been putting together of a cluster of Murrays that seemed to be related going back to about 1650. It was around about the time I serendipitously heard about a Kennedy Murray cousin from Sydney had done a DNA test with the Murray DNA project, where he was told he was not actually a Murray. He was told to go and speak to the McGregors, who had their own DNA project linked to the Y DNA that informed a lot of these projects only 10 or 15 years ago, not so long ago. So the cousins went to speak to the McGregors, and they were able to be located in a registry or database with an extremely close match to a line that went back to a Robert Murray, known to be based in the Glasgow district, also around 1650. So this got me really, really keen, and I contacted Clan Gregor and put in touch with their DNA project and a key Clan Gregor historian, Peter Lorry. The guy that DNA project that I was linked up to was a Professor Neil McGregor, who just happened to be from an Australian university. So both Peter and Neil were sort of interested, but they were very sceptical that we'd ever find any connection, saying that you've got to have documentary evidence linked to DNA evidence, and then very unlikely that we would ever be able to find this connection or verify it. So I got them interested, and then 3 months later, suddenly they got very excited, and then I got this email saying, effectively, you're not going to believe this. So it turned out that they'd been able to reasonably verify that the guy that I had located as the earliest ancestor in the Ayrshire district, south of Glasgow, was a very close cousin of Robert Murray, who was living near Glasgow at the time. More than this, there were two significant things that followed. One was that the Clan Gregor were pretty excited because this family were part of a pivotal Glen Lyon family line of the MacGregors that they knew about, had a lot of evidence, including the immediate family of both Robert and Hugh in the city of Perth in Scotland. And more than this, the second connection was that this family, including the cousins, had been identified as direct descended from quite a famous 16th century compiling author, Sir James MacGregor, who wrote what turns out to be an extremely valuable book in Scottish history called the Dean of Lismore's Book. It was well known to Scottish historians as well as the Clan Gregor Society. For the Scottish historians, this book is very valuable with a record of ancient, up until medieval times, Scottish Highland culture and stories, and which are often put to epic poetry in Gaelic, even though going right back, some of them may have been in Pictish. Sir James MacGregor was the titular Dean of Lismore himself. He was a local vicar of Fortingall, which is in the area of Glen Lyon in Perthshire. That's why, for many historians, this book is very, very valuable, because it showed that the Highlands Scottish Gaelic culture can be recognised to be quite distinct from Irish Gaelic, which a lot of people have been arguing for centuries had really just come over from Ireland. So this showed that that wasn't the case. It is credible then to accept the suggestion that Sir James MacGregor was descended across 22 generations from royalty, not just from Kenneth MacAlpin, the first king of Scotland in 843 Common Era, who united the Gaelic and Pictish kingdoms at the time, but his father Alpin, who had been king of the Dalriada Gaelic kingdom, as well as his mother, who was believed to have been the daughter of the then Pictish king. So likewise, it is also credible to think that Kennedy Murray Sr. was perhaps the 28 times grandson of Kenneth MacAlpin, the first king of the United Scotland. So I was getting excited when I started to explore this connection, which seemed to indicate that Kennedy Murray Sr., there was some credible evidence that there was, firstly, had been verified 6 times grandson of Sir James MacGregor, but that perhaps he was one of the 28 times grandsons of the first king of Scotland, and not of the Athol line, which he had thought, that I referred to a bit earlier in the series. So Glen Lyon is actually close to Blair Athol. Kennedy Murray Sr. thought he had been related to, and who Harry Murray BC had been invited to visit in 1917 after the Hyde Park investiture, and where he ended up spending quite a deal of time after staying with the Montgomery family and having an apparent romance with their daughter Clementine. So why was there a name change from MacGregor to Murray? This is a pivotal mystery of the family that I think many people want an explanation, and I did too. The background answer to this, not the immediate, but I need to set a bit of a scene, really goes back to the famous Battle of Bannockburn of 1314, when the Scottish King Robert the Bruce famously defeated the English and founded modern Scotland. Very famous event. Now, although the MacGregors and also the Murrays and a lot of the other Highlanders supported Robert the Bruce, one of his closest aides related to a family member was a Campbell, a lowland clan from the south with British, not traditional Highland origins. And they were given a large pivotal area, the Western Highlands of Scotland and the Argyll area in particular, which include a lot of land of the MacGregors. And so over the next few centuries, the MacGregors had an ongoing battle with the Campbells, where the Campbells kept taking their land. And that culminated in an immediate answer that in 1603, there was depending on your perspective, a famous or infamous Battle of Glenfruin orchestrated by the Campbells to try and finally wipe out the MacGregors and take all their land. There was an ambush against the MacGregors, but they won the battle. And following that, the Campbells got the then King James in Edinburgh to invite the MacGregor clan chief Alistair MacGregor and most of his senior clan chieftains down to Edinburgh to talk in 1604. They thought this was going to involve some sort of peace treaty or something, but King James then promptly executed Alistair, the clan chief, and 11 of his senior clan chieftains. And that year he issued a prohibition banning all the MacGregors from using the family name on pain of death. And this was in addition to an open season called in hunting down the MacGregor men, who were often murdered, and also the women, who were often branded or raped and sold into slavery. It was a ban that was not finally repealed until 1784, 180 years later. So in that time, the MacGregors had to take on other family names or aliases, and many of these families forgot that they were MacGregors, which included the Ayrshire Murrays. So these are the hidden MacGregors, many of them around the world, many of them in the US as well as Australia, Canada, as well as the UK, have forgotten about their origins. Now, in my book that links up a little bit to this podcast series, I've gone into quite a deal of chapter 15 related information about Clan Gregor and their origins, including their partial restoration of reputation in the early 19th century, overseen by Sir Walter Scott, along with the Dean of Lismore scholar, William Skene, who was a close friend of Sir Walter Scott. And they had rediscovered, perhaps some through the Dean of Lismore's book in particular, the ancient royal links of the MacGregors, whose motto, not surprisingly, turns out to be "Royal is my race," Si Regal Maldrim, which is "Royal is my race" in Gaelic. I also was aware that the Murrays were from the Moray district to the north and were a Pictish clan going back a great deal earlier in history, right back into Roman times, when the Picts repulsed the Romans when they were trying to invade the northern parts of UK and the Scotland areas. This is my hypothesis, that the Murrays were the main exemplary clan of the northern Picts, going back way back. And if you look at the MacGregor country on a map, which is the central part of Scotland, the Perthshire area, across to the Western Highlands, this is a central part of Scotland, geographically and I think historically. We know there were two kingdoms of the Picts leading up until 843 AD. And I believe that the Murrays and the MacGregors were two clan offshoots of the two main royal families that dominated those two Pictish kingdoms. One final point on Walter Scott. A lot of people would have heard of Rob Roy. Rob Roy was one of his books, and Rob Roy has been made into a Hollywood movie, of course, and is a legend in Scotland as a Robin Hood type figure who fought the English and apparently a number of corrupt inheritors of former MacGregor lands. So coincidentally, Harry Murray had bought a property in 1828 already named Glen Lyon. And I believe that his decision to buy that property when he was searching around North Queensland was linked to his stay at Glen Lyon on his 1917 visit to the Scottish Highlands. The recently discovered fact that the original Scottish Highlands of the family are in fact the Glen Lyon area of the Scottish Highlands is an amazing coincidence. But I've started to think that perhaps all this was more than just a coincidence. Perhaps this was all meant to be, and that this was a great family history mystery that was meant to be rediscovered.
And you know what's amazing? You know, he's come out as a convict, and as far as the Australian chapter of the family goes, you've got Kennedy Murray Senior sort of a little bit tarnished in a way. I mean, not these days. We, think that convict in the family is wonderful. But the fact that you've discovered that on the Kennedy side, you've got Countess of Eglinton. So, of course, you would have been pretty happy about that. And then this DNA discovery, it's lifted the bar completely.
2020 was when I first started to really explore the Scottish ancestry of the Kennedy Murray family. I had really begun because my mother's also a Murray, and I wanted to see if there was any possible connection between. So I really did a lot of exploring of the Murray line and history and clan. There is a website which talks about Australian royalty. It's an ironic website because Murrays are actually featured there. But the Australian royalty connection was really because it's a term popularised by Jack Thompson on Who Do You Think You Are that featured Kennedy Murray, that Australian royalty are people who are born from convicts. And so I made a little bit of a note leading into the final chapter, making it about all the sort of pseudo-royalty and fake royalty. And then there is apparent real royalty in the origins of the Kennedy Murray's ancestry.
Cameron, now let's move on and talk about Kennedy Murray Senior's children, so the next generation in Australia. I'd love to know more about them.
We've talked about Kennedy Murray's two families, including Kennedy and Elizabeth to Anne White, which was a common law marriage, and a second family to his marriage in 1814 to Anne Parker. From that second marriage, there were four sons who, when Anne Parker was committed to a lunatic asylum in 1820, Kennedy Murray tried to look after his 4 young sons for about 3 years, very valiantly. And then it obviously got too much, and I believe the family of Archibald Bell, the chief magistrate of the Hawkesbury at the time, seemed to have assisted in getting the 3 youngest boys enrolled in the Cabramatta Orphan School. One of the sons, Henry, died at the school about 1822. There was John, the oldest, who accompanied Kennedy where he settled at Pittwater at Coasters Retreat, and had a couple of huts there that are on record. I've traced John's life, and I believe I've located that he died as a waterman drowned in Sydney Cove in 1843. Now, the 2 other sons had large families, and I've mentioned William briefly already, who was an apprentice or indentured to John Blaxland, the brother of Gregory, the famous Gregory Blaxland, who was one of the 3 men who found a way across the Blue Mountains in 1813. Much later on, William ended up working in the Mulgoa area. George Henry Cox, who's actually a grandson of William Cox, married Elizabeth, the daughter of Archibald Bell, and they invited William to come out to Mudgee to work on their Burrundalla farm, which the homestead is still there today, and it's a magnificent building. So the thing about William was that he had 12 children, 10 of them were daughters, so there was really only one of his 2 sons who had 10 children, and then William was another son. He only had 1 son. So John produced some Murray descendants. Most of his daughters are married around the Mudgee area, many of them to prominent pastoralist families in the district. And so William Murray had 69 known grandchildren, mainly in that district. The other son I haven't really talked about was James Murray, and he was indentured in the early 1830s to a Cabramatta farmer called Henry Brooks. And he was obviously taught some very good practical skills. By 1839, we know that James had become a bullocky, and he had moved to the Southern Highlands where he had his own bullocky team. And there in 1840, he met a Jane Carter, whose family were settlers in the Berrima area. And then James married her. A year or so later, a bit like his great-grandfather, Jane was pregnant at the wedding. After the marriage, they settled at Sutton Forest, and then soon had their own farm called Canyon Lee. They ran the local store for many, many years. They had 9 children. They had 1 daughter who died very young, at the age of 10. It was an epilepsy-related condition. And the 8 sons all had big families, and they were all prominent pastoralists or community leaders in the Southern Highland areas, including Barrel. So there are a large number of Kennedy Murray's descendants there and elsewhere around New South Wales today. So James Murray, his line, had 66 known grandchildren. In addition to the 2 main New South Wales lines of the Kennedy Murrays, I briefly want to cover the other main Kennedy Murray families at Evandale, including those of Kennedy Murray Jr.'s half-siblings, descended from Anne White. So we've already talked generally about Kennedy Murray Jr.'s first family was Sarah McQueen, where there were 10 children, including those mentioned already, the early daughters Sarah and Annie, and sons Thomas John Murray and William Kennedy Murray have already been discussed. There was also Elizabeth, known as Mary, who moved to North Queensland and started a small dynasty there after marrying an Arthur Weller. Kennedy Murray Jr.'s second family, with Hannah Goodall Murray, produced 7 children who all initially remained in the Evandale area on the Trafalgar farm that Hannah acquired soon after the loss of Kennedy's Prosperous house and the related estates in 1861. So Edward Kennedy Murray, the father of Harry, was able to continue farming on some of the Blanchfield farm leased from the new owner. He was the eldest brother. There were 3 other brothers at Trafalgar, Frank, Henry and Albert, who set up a profitable agricultural supplies business specialising in crop seeds, which took them interstate to Victoria and New South Wales. Henry later became an influential member of Legislative Council from the Devonport area. And Albert did well enough to buy his mother's leased farm in the late 1880s. The daughters all married well and produced large families in Tasmania, including 2 that married the littler brothers of Edward Kennedy Murray's wife, Clarissa. So this is all discussed in the book. Kennedy Murray Jr.'s sister, Elizabeth, married James Lucas in 1819 on the same day that Kennedy Murray married Sarah. And James and Elizabeth produced 16 children. In 1854, James and Elizabeth, in their mid-50s, who had been living at Evandale up until that point, up and left and moved to Ballarat and other parts of Victoria, and a lot of their children followed suit. 3 of the eldest 4 daughters, Olivia, Mary Ann and Anne, had married in Tasmania and had decided to stay. Another daughter, Margaret, had married in Ballarat in 1853 and then followed her Scottish husband, Walter Mackenzie, to the then Californian goldfields. Eldest daughter, Elizabeth, and her younger sister, Sarah, had both moved with their husbands, brothers William and James Arch, to the same early goldfields town, Malden, near Castlemaine. Other sisters, Caroline and Emma, moved to towns fairly close by to James and Elizabeth between Ballarat and Castlemaine. That's Dalesford and Maryborough. And both lived long lives with big families, each producing 13 children. John Lucas settled near Shepparton and was later joined in that area by another brother, Nathaniel, and the other surviving child, Charles Lucas, moved to Port Fairy by the late 1850s. Kennedy Murray had several half-siblings from his mother's marriage to Richard Sides, who all ended up at Evandale, living as part of his little village, Prosperous village and community there, after Anne White died in 1820 at Norfolk Plains. The youngest daughter, Margaret, married another Lucas brother, Thomas, and moved to Geelong in 1840, where they had 14 children. The eldest half-sister was Mary Ann, who had married Kennedy Murray's lifelong best friend, George Collins, in 1822, and they produced 12 children. As a prominent pastoralist family of the emerging Tasmania, most of their children remained in the colony. And then there was brother Thomas Sides, who moved with his own family of 9 children to Westbury from Evandale in the 1860s after Kennedy's death. So just as the offspring of William and James mainly remained in New South Wales, the Tasmanian Murrays and extended family included many who either moved to the Victorian goldfields or those who remained in Tasmania. So if we put William's grandchildren with James and we add in Elizabeth's 97 grandchildren and Kennedy Murray's 95 grandchildren, we have Kennedy Murray Sr. having produced 327 great-grandchildren. And this was part of what I believe to be one of his significant legacies of one of modern Australia's largest family trees. Now, I just want to make an additional note that in my book, I've extended this to include Kennedy Murray Jr.'s 3 half-siblings from Anne White, who were all Evandale-based, who bore an additional 35 grandchildren and 142 great-grandchildren. I'm actually also in possession and look after the family tree. I estimate is close to 50,000, which is very similar to the Lucas family. After all the life adventures of both Kennedy Murray Sr. and his son, Kennedy Murray Jr., both part of what was a very significant legacy.
Please go to my Facebook page, Family History Mysteries. You will find there a link to Cameron's website that is based on the research he has done on his family, as well as a link to his book, where you'll be able to find a lot more information of Kennedy Murray's descendants and the story of Evandale in Tasmania and the story behind his Scottish lineage. If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.